All right, I'm going to call to order the Monday, November 5th meeting of the Arlington Redevelopment Board, being recorded by ACMi. First agenda item this evening is zoning bylaw amendment for medical and recreational marijuana establishments. This is a public hearing, which I will open now. Jenny Rape and Aaron Zerko are going to give us a presentation for the last questions, and I will get up for a public hearing. Jenny and Aaron, thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Jenny Rape, Director of Planning and Community Development. I'm actually going to hand it over to Aaron Zwerko, who's the Assistant Director of Planning and Community Development, and will be making the presentation on behalf of the study group, who's also here, and she'll recognize them in just a moment. So thank you, and we'll get to the public hearing component after her presentation.
Hi, I'm Erin Zorko, the Assistant Director. Paul, do you want me to move the floor?
Thank you.
I'll use the microphone so everyone can hear me. So I'm going to get started with our presentation for the evening. So this is the public hearing for special town meeting warrant Article 2, medical and recreational marijuana establishments. So there's some background that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of. So zoning for medical and recreational marijuana establishments dates back to 2014 annual town meeting, when zoning was adopted for medical marijuana treatment centers. And then there was an article at the 2016 special town meeting, the 2017 annual town meeting, and then most recently at the 2018 special town meeting, which occurred in May. The moratorium on recreational marijuana establishments was extended to the end of this year, so through December 31st, 2018. So I wanted to give a little bit of general information about what sort of policy checklist items should be taken into account when zoning for adult use or recreational marijuana. So you can see here, established goals, timeline, process for adopting local policy. So we're working with a marijuana study committee to come up with these zoning amendments, and we plan to have this implemented by the end of this year, with special town meeting happening in early December. The second item was determine license types and numbers, and that's really what the zoning amendments will address. Third, adopt zoning standards, which is why we're here tonight and why we'll all be here again for special town meeting on December 5th, 2018. And then there's the established local selection process, again, working with the the marijuana study committee, and the roles of the select board, the ARB, and the Board of Health will establish the local process. And then finally, pass optional local sales tax. And that is going to be considered at the special town meeting in December under Article 3. So the next couple of slides I'm going to go through kind of quickly. There is a handout at the back of the room that has the next 2 slides, information on it. So there's local board rules. So the Arlington Redevelopment Board would be involved, the Select Board, and the Board of Health. As you can see, under the Select Board, sets a local excise tax rate. Again, that's Article 3 at special town meeting. And then I also want to point out the Board of Health is going to be discussing their proposed regulations for recreational marijuana establishments on November 14th at their meeting at 5:30 in this building, with the goal to adopt those regulations by December 5th. So then let's talk about all the state agencies involved. There's a lot of them, but probably the most important item to note on this slide is that DPH, the Department of Public Health, will ultimately transfer oversight of medical marijuana treatment centers, MMTC, to the Cannabis Control Commission by the end of this year. So it will be the regulation oversight will be consolidated under one agency. So the next slide is just the text of the warrant article. We've identified that we'll be making revisions and amendments to the section 2 on definitions, section 3.4 on environmental design review, section 5 on district regulations, and section 8 on special regulations. So now our marijuana study committee, we have 4 members here in attendance this evening, Jordan, Paul, Christina, and Sarah. But you can see the rest of the makeup of the committee on the board. It was a mix of residents and town officials. The study committee met twice on October 10th and 17th, and I also want to point out that Natasha Whedon, the public health director, and Captain Julie Flaherty also participated in the meetings. So that gets us to the zoning amendments. What are other communities doing? Based on our research, we found that there's generally new categories of uses identified for recreational marijuana establishments. Most communities were also adopting the 500-foot buffer from K to 12 public and private schools per state regulation. We also identified a special permit requirement, a requirement on the cap of the number of establishments, density limits between establishments, and consideration of additional land uses in the buffer. So on the screen now you'll see different types of marijuana establishments. So these are the different establishments that will be addressed by the zoning regulations. Again, this is also on the handout at the back of the room. But the one important thing to note that at all of these establishments there will be no on-site consumption. Additionally, medical marijuana treatment centers are not considered a recreational marijuana establishment. Just for a note, the Tier 1 cultivator under micro business refers to a 5,000 square foot canopy. So the proposed use categories in zoning districts. We assigned zoning districts to the different uses based on existing similar uses in the zoning bylaw. We eliminated the 2 business districts, B1 and B2, from consideration for all types of marijuana uses, as these 2 zoning districts are generally described as neighborhood business districts that might be located within primarily residential districts. Marijuana production facilities are also further limited to only the B4 district and the industrial district due to the similar existing use categories already in the zoning bylaw. And then just to note that the medical marijuana treatment centers was expanded to be allowed in B2A, B3, B4, and B5. So that is a change from the existing medical marijuana treatment center zoning, which was limited to B3 and B5. So the state regulations require a 500-foot buffer around public and private K to 12 schools. The study committee also considered additional land uses to be located within a buffer. And you can see that described on the maps. That was printed small in a handout in the back, but also on these 2 boards on either side of me. So the additional land uses that they included was a 200-foot buffer around public libraries, a 300-foot buffer around town-owned playgrounds and recreational facilities, and then additionally we looked at daycares, but the study committee did not recommend a buffer around them. I also want to point out that the amendments allow the ARB to reduce the buffer around public libraries and playgrounds and recreational facilities should the ARB find site-specific factors or if the applicant demonstrates that proximity to the aforementioned facilities will not be detrimental based on the criteria established in section 333 and 334, and that refers to special permit criteria and the environmental design review criteria. So here you go. It's small, which is why we printed the bigger boards. But I also wanted to point out that we looked at the 2 libraries in a little bit more depth. So you can see that on the screen here with the Robbins Library and dividing into 50 feet buffer, or 50 feet increments. And here's the Fox Library. So let's talk a little bit about the way that we further limited the number of establishments. There isn't a lip, I'm sorry. Okay. So these are tools that we identified to limit the number of establishments that are actually public facing. So that's the marijuana retailers. So a marijuana retailer or an MMTC can't be located within 2,000 feet of another marijuana retailer or MMTC as proposed. The zoning amendments also establishes a cap on the number of marijuana retailers. So that cap, which is allowed by the state regulations, is no more than 20% of the number of liquor licenses for off-premises consumption. And that effectively limits the numbers of marijuana retailers to 2 in Arlington, and that is assuming that the special home rule legislation is approved by the legislature to increase the current number of liquor licenses from 5 to 6, as approved by town meeting earlier this year.
Can I ask you a question?
We'll take questions.
Until the end.
Yeah.
Oh,
You'll have your chance.
So other considerations that we included in the proposed zoning was that it requires a special permit from the ARB, much like medical marijuana treatment centers. We also required a new special permit should an existing medical marijuana treatment center decide to convert to a recreational establishment or co-locate with a recreational establishment. We also further limited production facilities. Those facilities cannot be larger than 5,000 square feet, and if the marijuana products cultivated or produced there are for non-medical use, it must be a micro business, which is limited to a canopy size of 5,000 square feet. And the last item that we included was that all sales and cultivation must be conducted within a fixed building. So this is a brief slide with a lot of words on it describing how the permit procedure would be at the state level and the local level. At first, an establishment would apply to the Cannabis Control Commission, and within 60 days of that application, a municipality needs to respond to the Cannabis Control Commission that says whether the establishment is in compliance or could be in compliance with local bylaws, and that includes zoning. Should all that work out, the Cannabis Control Commission should issue a provisional license. With that provisional license, the applicant must demonstrate that a community meeting was held in the host community within 6 months of the application to the Cannabis Control Commission. The provisional license will identify a list of conditions that the applicant would need to meet, and that might include successfully completing the local permitting. If all that goes well, then the issuance of the final license. And this is where the timeline can significantly vary depending on how long it takes for an establishment to go through the local permitting process and also to negotiate a host community agreement. So currently, the Cannabis Control Commission has issued final licenses, but no sales have begun in Massachusetts. And final licenses were issued to establishments in Northampton and Leicester. And the reason why no sales have begun is because there's final inspections that need to occur at those facilities. And that's about it. So I guess I'll turn it back to the board.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Questions from board members, Andy?
I don't have any questions at this time. That was done. There's a presentation.
Okay.
He's going to circle back a little bit. You said the amount of license issued was no more than 25% of liquor license, right?
20%.
20%, right? And then you said that gives us a limit of 2
2
of retail.
Of retail licenses, yes.
And then growing facilities have to have a certain minimum required size, right?
That's right.
And that's 10,000 square feet?
5,000 square
Sorry,
feet.
I apologize.
That's okay.
5,000 square feet, okay.
Would it be helpful if I use the microphone? If there's other questions?
We don't
Okay.
Just speak with it.
I think those are the 2 I have for now. You did a pretty good presentation, thank you.
David?
Well, first, I'd just like to express appreciation for the work that the Marijuana Study Committee has done. I recognize recognize the difficulty of coming up with an entire new set of regulations for something like this, and I just wanted to acknowledge the work that's been put in. So I have a number of questions. I also have identified in my review a number of typographical or grammatical issues, some of which I feel are significant. And just before I start going through them one by one, I wanted to just inquire as to what the best way of dealing with those sorts of issues might be at this point.
Typographical issues, since we have a second meeting scheduled this week for a potential vote, I would suggest that any typographical or grammatical issues be redlined to the department.
Okay.
Changes there, but any substantive changes we'll discuss tonight.
Okay. So I did have a number of questions. So in the definition for marijuana retailer, I may be misreading it, but it seemed to be internally inconsistent, where the first sentence authorizes sales to consumers and the second sentence prohibits sales to consumers.
From delivery. The difference is one is happening in a store, purchasing in a store. The other sentence is they may not deliver those products to the consumer. That is actually a separate definition of marijuana transporter.
All right, I understand. So I might suggest clarifying. I was interpreting delivering in a general sense rather than literally delivering.
Yeah, literally delivering.
So I would suggest possibly clarifying that to mean actual delivery to another premise.
Maybe from off-site delivery.
Yeah,
of
something like that.
marijuana products to consumers or something of that
Just
nature.
off-site.
Would that be one way to?
That makes sense. Yeah. Next one, the definition of marijuana research facility. I think that the first two sentences actually need to be combined to actually effectively define research facility, because otherwise they can be read independently of each other.
So you're saying they have to do both?
Well, it has to be an academic institution, et cetera, authorized to do business that cultivates, purchases, or otherwise acquires, et cetera.
Excuse me, for the benefit of the audience, could you maybe just read out the language that you are discussing?
Yeah, do you have copies anywhere?
Or copies of the draft zoning in the back? No, okay. Well,
Can you put them on the screen?
Well, yeah, we can go back to that slide.
No, the actual language of the bylaw.
We can try to do that too. It'll take a moment.
Yes, that'd be much more helpful. Thank you.
We'll try to do that in just a moment.
Thank you.
It's also available.
Yeah, that doesn't do as much good right now, but thank you.
Right.
I appreciate the intent.
So the question is basically, first of all, these definitions pretty much come directly from the state law, I believe. Just so you know, that's where they're lifted from. I think the two sentences could be merged as one, or they can live separately. The first sentence is a marijuana research facility is an academic institution, nonprofit corporation, or domestic corporation or entity authorized to do business in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And then it goes on, a marijuana research facility may cultivate, purchase, or otherwise acquire marijuana for the purpose of conducting research regarding marijuana and marijuana products. The question is, should the two sentences be merged together?
You could say the second sentence, you could just add also. Marijuana research facility may also cultivate.
Well, let's keep this to questions and concerns
Right,
right now.
right, yeah.
Okay.
So, so marijuana micro business, it refers to something called a Tier 1 marijuana cultivator, which is not a defined term.
So it is defined in the state regulations,
Okay.
but not in our bylaws.
But not in our bylaws.
But our bylaws pointed back to, or points back to the CMR
Okay.
and to
It's
the relevant
right there, it
statute.
says pursue that.
I see. Okay. My next question was about the tables in sections 5.5.3 and 5.6.3. The uses listed in the proposed zoning changes don't exactly match up to the terminology that's being defined. Some of the definitions, some of the uses listed are a little bit different than what's defined in the definition section, and some of the things that are in the definition section are not, seem to be missing from the tables, and I just want to make sure that we're being as consistent as we need to be. For instance, micro-business, cultivator, and marijuana product manufacturer are not listed in the tables, but they are defined in the definition section.
And I think that's because we've folded up those uses into like one umbrella. The way that the zoning bylaw currently works is it's sort of an umbrella of uses. But we can, of course, call out those specifics underneath that sort of umbrella. The bolded part is the umbrella, the group.
I mean, my concern is there are a significant number of possible types of establishments being set up here, and I want to avoid confusion to the extent possible. And then the last thing I wanted to just mention, which is in 8.3, which was standards for marijuana uses, section B, location, where it does talk about the different buffer zones. I have two questions there. The first question is, I understand where the 500-foot buffer around schools came from. Why did the committee choose different buffer distances for recreational facilities and libraries?
I'm glad to answer that question, but I would also perhaps, we have two of the committee members who would actually like to make some comments. I'll give an answer, and then I would like us to let those two committee members also speak. The group actually looked very hard at this issue and really studied and had a lot of discussion around what was the appropriate sizing of that buffer and what should be included in the buffer, or not included in the buffer, if you will, so that things are protected. And I think that after looking at the maps and understanding what would happen if you saturate the map with basically a very large buffer zone, you end up zoning out this use. So we tried very carefully to keep buffers in place while also allowing for this use to be spread throughout potentially different business districts throughout Arlington, so that it was not completely located in one business district, which was what was happening once you start adding on a 500-foot buffer, for example, to every single area, basically, or park or playground or libraries. And so we then sort of played around with the scale of that buffer, which is why it kept on getting lower. And we settled on, I think, the buffer limit that you see proposed. But that's also still up for discussion, which is why we've presented to you what happens when you change that buffer zone around the two libraries. Just to give you a perspective on when you have the buffer zone the way it's proposed in the zoning bylaw, you actually cancel out most of the business district in East Arlington, compared to if you change the size of that buffer, you end up with some opportunity in, for example, in that instance, the B3 zone. So we wanted to be sensitive to the fact that some things require the buffer to address certain issues that people were very sensitive to on the committee, but also allow the use to be located in Arlington, which was the task of the committee ultimately. So that's my summary of the discussion. After, yeah. Okay.
Anything else, David?
Yeah, my last question was also in the location section, which was that the very last thing, part 3, which is limiting the distance between marijuana retailers and medical marijuana treatment centers, so that they can't be located within 2,000 feet of another retailer or treatment center. I was curious whether there'd been discussion around adding any of the other marijuana establishments that are being defined to that limitation, or whether it's intentional that it is specifically limited to only retailers and treatment centers.
So we decided to focus on the retailers and the treatment centers because those are public facing. The other ones would not have a public counter or point of sale. So these are the facilities where a customer or a patient can visit, purchase whatever products they're interested in, and leave. So that's why we focused on those 2 specific uses versus the other items that have been defined and identified in the proposed amendments.
Okay, I understand. That's all I have at the moment.
Jane?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what David said. I think this is a really wonderful job in putting this together and getting it to us. I also have some wording changes that I can share afterward, but I do have some questions too. Starting with page 4 of the draft. Table section 5.6.3. Can someone explain why these facilities are limited to the industrial zone and not the MUs and the PUDs also? Because both the MUs and the PUDs call for multi-use, which would, I think, include commercial establishments. So I'm sort of wondering, what was the thinking that limited just to the industrial? I know we don't have any PUDs at the moment, I don't think, but if they came up, it might be an appropriate place to have one of these things. Same with the MUs. So I was just wondering what the decision was that limited to just the industrial.
We, I think as a group, we talked quite a bit about which business districts we wanted to include this in, and we had quite a lot of conversation about B1, B2, actually. And then we looked at the recommended areas where these types of establishments should be located. This is just a recommendation based on the state. And industrial was the primary zone for these types of uses, these categories. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't explore what you were talking about. It wasn't something that the group necessarily pushed for.
I mean, I know that they're not there now, but I would think, as I said before, they are available, they may come up, they may be appropriate places to have the facilities. So I think we should take a look at whether it makes sense to expand the class of use to MU and PUD also.
Could you just move the table down so that we can see the slide there?
It's the second table I was talking about.
But I think you'll find it's all one table, it's just split onto two lines.
The comment is why we didn't include these as a special permit in these two other districts. So why are we only recommending them in industrial?
But they are special permits in the other districts.
No,
Only in industrial is what's being proposed, not in the multi-use or the planned unit development district.
Right, but they are special permit in B2A, B3, B4 and B5 as well as
Correct.
industrial. So it's not just industrial.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
What's a different table?
The different
It's a
table.
different table. So if we can hold comments and questions from the audience until you have a chance until I open public comment, please. Anything else?
Yeah, next, the same section David talked about on the last page and location, in parentheses, which says a marijuana retailer or medical marijuana treatment center shall not be permitted within 2,000 feet of another retailer or treatment center, yet we allow them to be co-located. And I think there's a contradiction between not having them within 2,000 feet of each other, but allowing them to be co-located in the same place. So that's, I think we need to figure out what to do about that. Secondly, it wasn't clear to me whether this intended to say a marijuana retailer shall not be permitted within 2,000 feet of another retailer and treatment center within 2,000 feet of another treatment center, or a treatment center could not be within 2,000 feet of another retailer, since theoretically they have a different customer base. So I don't know. I think this needs a little clarity as to what it means. My preference in thinking this through, but maybe members of the committee have a reason for doing this, would be not allowing more than one retailer within 2,000 feet of another, but allowing them within any distance of a treatment center, which would mean rewriting this to say a marijuana retailer shall not be permitted within 2,000 feet of another retailer, and a treatment center shall not be permitted within 2,000 feet of another treatment center, although I'm not sure why you couldn't have two treatment centers within 2,000 feet of each other. So some of it's clarity and some of it's just what did you really intend? Did you intend not to have a retailer within 2,000 feet of a treatment center? And if so, what about co-location, which this allows?
Yeah, I think, actually, I might ask you to talk about the density and how we came up with that, and then how it relates to the co-locating.
Yeah, so the density limitation, the 2,000 feet, excuse me, was with the analysis that was based off of the existing facility that just opened on Water Street, the existing treatment center. So when you measure 2,000 feet as a buffer around, or a density around that location, including the buffers that the study committee looked at, that limits essentially it to 1 in the center. And then the other one, again, assuming that the special legislation is approved, to up the number of liquor licenses to 6, so that there's 2 marijuana retailers. That would put the second retailer either outside of Arlington Center, so that there wasn't a proliferation of the use in Arlington Center. I think, to your second point about the clarity on the marijuana treatment centers, I think that the language needs to be clarified here along your lines, because we do allow co-location as part of the zoning amendment. So I think we'll take a look at that and see how we can clarify that a little bit more to address your comment.
And again, was the intention to not allow a retailer within 2,000 feet of a treatment center, or not within 2,000 feet of another retailer.
I think it was retailer to retailer was
And
the intention.
treatment center to treatment center, so this would definitely need to be clarified. Okay.
But with the reality that the current, and this is the treatment center potentially becoming a retailer. So
Right.
that's why we started
Right.
in that space.
Next question is the cap on the number of special permits. Can you talk about why you wanted to cap the number? At 2 rather than 6 or 4 or 5 or 3?
It, to me, felt to be something that is appropriate for the community. We, as a quote-unquote yes community, so a community that voted in favor of the ballot question in 2016, we could not go lower than 20% without putting the question on a ballot. We could certainly go higher than the 20%, and some communities have. I don't know if in reality there would be enough locations to support a higher number than 2 retailers in the community. However, it is an allowance in the state regulations that, again, a quote-unquote yes community could pursue. And it felt appropriate based on the conversations with the study committee. So the combination of the density buffer and the cap felt appropriate based on the conversations that were had in that with that committee.
All right, so I'm not clear why 2 was the number chosen rather than 3 or 4, for example.
I think, again, it's a reflection of the study group, and that we were coming together with various opinions and feelings about these particular types of establishments. So wanting both to allow for this use and needing to zone for it, but also being sensitive to where they might be located. And so we took the state regulations and started from that point, and nobody in the group pushed for more than that or greater than, but it doesn't mean that this board might not want to have that discussion more in that direction.
Yeah,
But that's where the study group was at, in terms of sort of taking what we had as an option and going from there.
I don't know what the right number should be, but I'm not sure the right number is 2. If it ends up being 2 only because the combination of the density and the buffer zones really means there are only going to be 2 in town, that doesn't mean that this should say 2. It could say 4, for example, even though we may only end up with 2 in town because of density and buffer zones. So I don't know when we're going to have that discussion, but I think it might make sense if we have 6 places that have liquor licenses for off-premises alcohol consumption. And, you know, a number of years ago, we had to vote to overturn the blue laws in town. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure I've heard a rationale about why the marijuana number should be fewer than the alcohol, you know, the off-site alcohol consumption. If we end up deciding to limit it to 2, I would really like to reword this to say something along the lines of total number of licenses may not exceed 2 or 20%, blah, 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 whichever is greater, so that we're setting the floor at 2, because right now, if one of the licenses got pulled, we'd be setting the floor at 1. I don't think that's anybody's intention to only have 1 in town. So if we're ending up at 2, and I'm not sure we should be at 2, we need to say that 2 is minimum or 20%, whichever is greater. And there's some other wording I'd like to see changed in that. Yeah, the other comments I had were related to wording changes for clarity, things like that. But those are my questions.
Those can be submitted to the director. So, thank you, Gene. Anything else?
That's it.
So I too want to thank the committee. I think that both they and staff, town council did a very good job of drafting what's before us this evening. Thank you for your work and participation on that committee. Just to clarify a couple of questions when we start to talk about the 20% amount and number 2, that's specifically for recreational facilities, is that
Right.
correct? That does not include treatment centers. Okay, so we'll clarify that, please. When we begin to talk about buffers and how town-owned recreational facilities are defined, how did the committee come to that decision and that definition? As I look at this map, there are a lot of little green R's all over the map that really increase that buffer zone to a pretty high degree. Places where it's not necessarily practicable that some of these places would open at all.
Do you have the map?
Yes.
How did we define it?
How do you define town-owned recreational facilities? You know, it looks like it might include every basketball court and soccer field in town.
It does not, actually. So I'll let Erin talk about working with Adam Karofsky from GIS on the definitions and what this particular layer means. Yeah, which is not the same as, for example, protected open space. It's a
Right.
very
And some of it
specific-
seems redundant where they're already in the school buffer.
in a school buffer, right?
Or, you know, in the case of Stratton, Pierce, in areas where there's no residential, commercial
So,
availability.
So the focus on town-owned playgrounds and recreational facilities came out of conversation about specific facilities, like the Boys and Girls Club off on Spy Pond. So using that as an example, and excuse me, also the rink on Summer Street. So using those as examples of active recreational facilities, that's what we've focused on in terms of the analysis, working with Adam Karofsky, who was the GIS director. So yes, they do oftentimes overlap, specifically the playgrounds and the schools. And oftentimes those are in residential districts where the use would not be allowed anyway. So it was really trying to identify where there's active recreation, where teenagers might be gathering and using the facility, but also having a narrow focus on what the study committee is also trying to protect, which is these uses where teenagers can gather, and that relates it to the choice of putting a buffer around the libraries, but disregarding day creeper facilities where the client is often much younger and with their parents. So I hope that answers the question.
I guess it does and it doesn't. The question is really one of practicality, where most of these zones are not affected, wouldn't be affected anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, we're adding a layer of complexity to delve through that doesn't necessarily need to be added. In the case of the Boys and Girls Club and the rink, for example, there's no adjacent use that would affect that buffer zone, or would come close to that buffer zone.
that's correct. The group had pretty lengthy discussions about the buffer zones and what should be in them, what should not be in them, and again, this is where we settled as a group. I think that was where the consensus was, but it is, of course, under the purview of this board that if you, and we explored basically what would happen if you changed the buffer around the libraries, but we could also explore that, not tonight, but perhaps should this hearing be continued to the next evening, we can explore that on the next, at the next meeting, changing the buffer down. But that was the reasoning behind including recreation facilities.
Consider that seems excessive. So this time, unless there are any other questions, the board will have additional time to deliberate. I'm going to open the floor to public comment. I would remind people that we are discussing a zoning bylaw amendment, not the relative virtues or dangers of marijuana itself. We are simply acting on the behest of Board of Selectmen, the people of the town that voted to allow these in town. So any comments that are made, please keep them specifically to the document before you tonight. Raise your hand. I will call on you. Please come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and please address any questions to the board, and then I will ask the appropriate party to respond. With that being said, public comment is now open. If there are members of the committee that would like to speak first, allow that.
Paul.
I'll take Attorney Check. Thank you, sir.
Shut up. Thank you.
Who's the one seeing you next?
And please forgive me, my tech is not working, so I haven't been able to get captions of anything tonight, so I've been sort of struggling along with everything. I was a member of the, my name is Paul Chuck. I'm an Arlington resident. I'm a homeowner here. I live here with my wife and my 11-year-old son. I'm a trial attorney by trade. I have been spending a fair bit of time working with the disability community, and frankly, it's the disability community that is connecting me into the cannabis world at this point. I think that I advocate for getting as many disabled individuals working in these facilities as they come in, because I think it's important to do that at the inception as opposed to waiting for it to happen later on. I agreed to come here tonight to speak to you because I wanted to give some input into what we did along the lines of the study group, so that you have an idea that that this was not something that was done haphazardly. This was what the two meetings that I participated in were very well organized. We had much exactly the same materials that are being presented to you tonight. Some of the amendments that have been made since our discussions, of course. There was very active discussion during the study group from all of the members of the community, and I got the impression from the comments being made that it was a rather diverse group. We had business people there, we had members of the community, we had police force represented. Every aspect of this was analyzed. I also need to indicate to you that I am a registered medical marijuana user because of the elements that I have. My hearing stems from meningitis, so I have neurological issues that are aided through cannabis use. From my part, I was not as concerned with the location of facilities in connection to the buffer zones. I understood the density issues in relation to business, but I also understood the optics of all of this. You don't want to have a marijuana facility next to your schools. You don't want to have anything that looks weird or reflects negatively upon the community. But I also, in my mind, I don't think that the comparison between cannabis and alcohol is very strange. And although I struggled a little bit at first with the notion of 20% or less than 20%, and had to wrap my mind around that because I'm not a zoning expert, but it makes sense to me. At one point, I remember indicating that if we should be comparing this to other alcohol facilities. There is an alcohol retail facility very close to a high school at this point. I don't think that allowing these facilities to come into the community is a bad thing. I don't think that it's going to hurt us in any way. I think all of that has been vetted and has been looked at in relation to, prior to this legislation coming down and prior to this being allowed within the community. which means that I really don't think that we're going to be seeing any changes in terms of what's going to happen with the community. There were some questions in relation to what's going to happen in parks and public spaces. Our police force has been doing a wonderful job with that, and I think they're going to continue to be doing a wonderful job with that. I think the difference here is that this takes away a block market that's been in existence for a long time, and it also allows the community, the township specifically, to benefit and profit from the sale of this product and this medicine. But I really just wanted to emphasize that it was a very well thought out process. All of the things that you people are bringing up tonight were considered. You may not have reached the same conclusions that you wanted to reach, but all of the concerns that I believe are legitimate and serious concerns for the community were discussed and are represented in the proposed amendment that's being presented to you tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weinstein.
Yeah, my name is Jordan Weinstein. I'm an appointee on the Marijuana Study Committee, an Arlington resident for about 15 years, homeowner, and also I'm a town meeting member, which gives me a slightly different perspective on this business of density, because while I am very much in sympathy with questions about why should density be limited and why should it be any different than liquor stores, I also feel that this has to be palatable, as Aaron had said, to community standards in the way that the community may think and vote in town meeting in December. So while I would rather see complete legalization, decriminalization of the whole, just treat it as if it were alcohol, another drug that's sold legally, I think that there is some wisdom in limiting density in order to make it, in order not to get a huge opposition from town meeting, an opposition from people who will undoubtedly oppose citing of retail marijuana stores anywhere in Arlington. There is going to be that opposition. The only thing that came to my mind was in terms of unforeseen consequences of tying the density number to the number of liquor stores or the percentage of liquor stores, is that my sense is that the two now will be conjoined, so that in the future, if there's any interest in expanding the number of retail liquor stores, people will also have to consider how that's going to impact the expansion of marijuana retail establishments. So I'm not, do you see what I'm saying? I'm not sure that that's a bad thing or a good thing, but I'm just saying that that's what I see as a potential fallout from this, that it could be sort of a reticence to increase liquor licenses, because it would also, by virtue of that 20% time, would also impact raise the number of marijuana retailers that could possibly be cited. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First, I thought when we came to the study committee, I thought that we were going to be starting from scratch, but this whole thing was extremely well organized, and all of these, the basic constructs of how the zoning laws could accommodate marijuana facilities was spelled out. The boundaries were clarified. There was a graphic representation. So a lot of work went into this even before we sat down at the table, and that was much appreciated. Initially, just to clarify, a lot of these sites that have been now given buffer zones, recreational facilities, the law, initially the first draft was only in regards to the public schools, K through 12. But some on the study committee said, well, they're not the only places where youth congregate. So how can we include and expand this to protect teenagers, especially, was the concern, who are going to be playing on the basketball court. So there was this wonderful compromise, I thought, and the reason why the buffer zones are less, as was explained, was because as you added more facilities that had buffer zones, you then began to decrease the possible locations where retail marijuana establishments could even be cited. So I thought that was a very clever way to do it. I thought it was skillfully done. In terms of the, there was a definition, I think one of you had raised, marijuana research facilities being in two sentences, separate sentences. My understanding is that the first really is the definition of what a research facility is. And the second sentence is what it may do. So in that sense, I think that it's fine leaving it as it is. I don't think it's necessary to combine. The other question I did have, or at least I just wanted to comment on, that in the location number, the section on location and the aspect of co-location and what the intention was in terms of saturation, whether it was specific to retail establishments, or that had been a question that I had, and I thought that the two really ought to be separated. That retail establishments should be treated separately from the medical establishments because of just because of this co-location problem. And I just think that the language needs to be, as you said, the language needs to be clarified so that coming back a couple of years from now, there's not going to be a debate over what the intent was. That's clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you mind if I sit here?
You prefer if you come up to the microphone, please.
Are you, Mr. Chairman, entertaining questions?
Yes, of course.
I was wondering if we could go back to the timeline for the process on the screen.
Yeah, of course.
There's been a lot of talk about the committee, and I was wondering, has the committee issued a written report on the results of their work? Not the permitting timeframe, the process timeframe that has everything finishing up by December, I believe.
A report on the work of the committee, other than posting the committee's
Right. So
minutes.
the
and
goal,
you mean this?
Policy, the process for adopting the policy is supposed to be finished by the end of the year. Yet it's now November, and you're determining the policy now. I'm a little confused about that. Don't you have to determine the policy first before you do the bylaw change?
Basically what this is saying is that with the marijuana study committee, they've established the goal. Do you want me to answer this?
Yes, please.
Yes. With the marijuana study group committee has established the goals, the timeline, and the process for adopting the policies. That's part of their charge, was to do that. And that, yes, by December 31st, we do need to have the regulations locally in place because the moratorium will be over at that point in time. So maybe it's just the way that it's worded on the screen, but that is what that implies.
So was there a report with the recommendations of the committee?
There's not a specific report coming from the committee other than what we've presented. The report is the bylaw draft. That's the report from the committee. And all of the meeting minutes and agendas, I believe, are all on the town's website for the 2 meetings that were held. We will have a report to special town meeting, as we would with any town meeting, but that won't be discussed until, when we're done with this process.
Can someone explain why you're only doing one bylaw amendment when in fact you're amending an existing bylaw and creating new regulations for a new use? I would have thought you would have done them separately.
We filed the warrant as one article, similarly to previous years where we also do the same kind of thing where we amend the zoning bylaw that captures definitions, it captures the use, it captures the districts, and then it also is capturing special regulations. So they're all lumped together into one article. We have done that in prior years, and this was as, of course, reviewed and approved by town council prior to being posted.
Yeah, I'm not contending there's anything legally wrong with it. As a policy matter, I'm trying to figure out what the rationale is for changing the existing regulations as they pertain to medical marijuana. We've had a grand total of one facility permitted. It's been operating, as far as I understand, in a matter of days. Has there been some experience that suggests that the existing bylaw pertaining to medical marijuana facilities needs to change, and in particular, that the number of zoning districts in which those facilities are allowed needs to be expanded?
Okay. In our research, as we noted with the buffer zones, there's not really, it really is basically zoned out from B3 and B5, those are the only two districts where medical marijuana treatment centers are currently allowed. So part of this proposal is to increase the number of business districts and other places where you can put a medical marijuana treatment center. And then the other amendment is to strike the nonprofit facility. I think that's actually the only other amendment to that bylaw, which is in keeping with state regulations.
But you are, if I understand the buffer zones correctly, you're adding buffer zones.
Right, there is not currently a buffer zone in that existing bylaw. We had been using the default buffer zone. As some people may recall from the permitting process for the medical marijuana treatment center, we had a lot of discussion about the 500-foot buffer zone that didn't exist. And so yes, part of this is adding a buffer zone which would be in keeping with what we had always intended, actually what town meeting had always intended when that zoning was initially adopted. So this would set that buffer zone, it would expand the number of districts, and it would also change that one component of that definition, striking nonprofit.
Mr. Chairman, I would request that the board divide the question and put two votes before town meeting, one pertaining to medical marijuana facilities and one to recreational marijuana and the associated business elements. In particular, and I believe I was a town meeting member at the time, but there was quite a bit of discussion on the zones and where the medical marijuana facilities could be located. And it was after quite a bit of debate that the current bylaw came into place. And I think that should be considered separately, any changes to that should be considered separately from the additional regulations pertaining to recreational marijuana.
Certainly take that under consideration.
And then, as a practical matter, though, I think anyone knowledgeable of the industry really doesn't expect medical marijuana, any more medical facilities to come in once the recreational facilities are allowed to be permitted. Another question I have specifically pertains to retail in the industrial district. Under the existing bylaw, retail is generally prohibited in the industrial district. And I'm wondering why marijuana facilities should be any different from other types of retail.
Mixed use is allowed in the industrial district, which includes retailers, as you know. And so we are including this into that same use category.
But are you saying that it has to be mixed use in order to qualify for the industrial zone, or can any retailer potentially qualify in the industrial zone if it's marijuana related and not mixed use?
Either same with any use in the industrial zone. It could be either mixed use or it could be an independent use that's allowed under special permit.
But what I'm saying is right now, for example, you cannot put a drugstore, standalone drugstore in the industrial zone. You cannot put a standalone liquor store or a grocery store for that matter. I don't think marijuana should gain any special treatment If you're going to change the industrial district to allow retail, I think you need to consider that more broadly and not do it just because somebody sticks marijuana on the name of their retail business. So just a couple other things. This 20% figure, I was a little confused about that because is the proposal to increase the number of all alcohol licenses to 6, is that right?
It was already proposed, and I think we were awaiting approval from DAG's office.
This
No, not actually.
special legislation under a home rule petition.
But assuming that passes, and 20% of 6 is 1.2, doesn't that mean you just have 1 allowed?
Yeah, I think it's written as a fraction, right, to capture the fractions.
It's rounded up to the nearest whole number.
Right.
Just one final comment, Mr. Chairman. I would ask that you do continue the hearing until Wednesday for the benefit of town meeting members. You may know, or those of you who are town meeting members, there was an email blast to encourage all town meeting members this evening to go to the sales job for the new high school. And therefore, most of them are not going to be here. I didn't see a similar blast for town meeting members to come here to this hearing. I would ask that when you do that for the Wednesday hearing, give them an opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Any other public comments, questions, concerns? Okay. Back to the board. If there are any written submissions you would like for us to look at, the public would like us to look at, please send those to the director by close of business tomorrow. Certainly be considered. We have 2 other public hearings on this evening, so I would certainly recommend that we continue deliberation to Wednesday night, because we already have it advertised on the schedule, but certainly leave that up to my colleagues on the board.
So motion.
Second.
So this hearing will be continued to Wednesday, November 7th, 2018, at 7:30 in this room.
It's actually, I think, 8:30
8:30?
on, or 8 o'clock rather,
No.
on Wednesday night.
8 o'clock on Wednesday, in the senior center. Okay, thank you. All right. We do have other business to attend to, so if you're planning to stay, you're certainly welcome to. If you're going to leave, please do so quietly. Thank you for those of you who came this evening. Next on our agenda this evening is EDR special permit review for John Erickson from Heineken Muffler at 20 Massachusetts Ave. We have the report here. If you want to drag a chair up, face us, keep you away. Appreciate it. You can introduce yourself and tell us what you are requesting for the board this evening, please. Thank you for coming and thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You can have a seat.
My name is Clark Thompson from Jim David Second Street and representing Heineken Muffler, 2022 Massachusetts Avenue. And they were asking to install 2 new wall signs, one on the front of the building, one on the side of the building, replacing 2 existing internally illuminated sign boxes that they currently have. They're proposing to have individually illuminated letters in yellow reading Heineken and a cabinet below it that has just the letters illuminated with a opaque background. It says Car Care Center. They're approximately, the overall size is 42 inches high by 11 feet long. And I believe within the scale that's allowable for a wall sign in each of these cases. We've got 2 elevations, one on Massachusetts Ave and one on side street. These are going to be illuminated by LED modules within the letters and also within the bottom section of the sign as well. And one of the reasons that we're trying to, Meineke is in a program to try to upgrade the signage and get all of their participating franchisees to have a similar look, so that the brand is similar throughout the country. And this is one of the options that they have, that they've approved upon.
I don't have any questions. I think it's fine. Questions, comments from you?
I agree. I have one. By doing this sign here, right, if you look at your existing photograph of all the signs, you're saying that you will then take down all the signage you have on the windows?
Yes.
And then you have one window that's all blocked off right now, and you've taken off that sign there too?
Right, we're going to take all of those.
And that's part of the
That's how they
transformation?
look, yeah.
So it
absolutely.
makes the building look more,
He really wants to, the corporate really wants him to have this sign, so he realizes that with all the window signs, that's not a very good idea to continue to do that, so he's going to allow his monarchy sign to be the ID for that, for the store, on one of these signs.
this is not a one-time wait, it's gonna, not gonna, like maybe a couple of years from now, there'll be new sales or, you know, that kind of stuff, or
I can't say for a couple of years from now. I know when we go to put the sign up, they're going to have to come down, you know, so I will certainly present it to him that he's not allowed to have any window signs or any extra signs because the board's approving this sign that we're asking for tonight.
thank you.
You're welcome.
David?
So the existing sign, that is internally illuminated right now?
Yes. Yeah.
And my only other concern was also the window signage, so I'm satisfied with that discussion. I think this is a big improvement over the existing signage.
Gene?
I have no questions or comments.
Open it up for public comment, but seeing that there are no one here to comment, I will close that. Turn it to the board for deliberation and potential vote.
I can add in the section G that all existing window signage will be removed. So I just noticed that it doesn't actually say that in here, but I can capture at this point, which everybody seems to be emphasizing and also like, and that the applicant says will occur.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
That's good.
I move that we approve the environmental design review for 2022 Massachusetts Avenue to Arlington, Mass. Docket 3580 for replacement of signage with conditions as discussed.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Congratulations.
Looks good.
I'll be in touch with you. Yeah. So, we'll give you the signed copy of everything. Not tonight, but I'll be in touch with you. Okay.
Thank you. Freely.
Well, I've got
Or actually, the next one.
Yes, one more.
Okay. It's the same guy, the same sign. Moving on to, I lost my agenda.
It's 780.
Item 4.
807.
Regarding Arlington Laundry Village at 807 Mass Ave. Special permit, public hearing. No need to reintroduce yourself, just please describe the sign in question here and the changes.
This laundromat's been there for many years, and he's decided that it would be helpful if he could have a wall, helpful to his business if he had a wall sign. Some people would say he didn't know it's there. And then he's proposing to do a 3-foot-high sign, which is similar to other signs on that building, an aluminum, non-illuminated sign, 3 feet high by 15 feet long, centered over the storefront in a beige aluminum with red Laundry Village and black Arlington. Again, very similar to what's throughout the block. And which just wants to install also.
Good. Thank you. I have no questions.
Yeah, I do have one
Thanks.
well, I'm sorry.
That's why you're here.
Would the owner reconsider the color of the backdrop of the yellow? I know he wrote in his brief that he wanted to blend in with the surroundings. Okay, this doesn't really blend in with the surroundings.
It's more of a, it's an ivory more than, my printer wasn't the great, it's an ivory more than a yellow. It's not yellow, I think
It looks yellow. It looks yellow.
It does look yellow.
This
Yeah.
looks like
Did I
bright.
did I leave
It does.
It looks like the chair, right?
It looks like
Yeah, oh, no, it's
yellow.
not, I thought I left, did I leave you a piece of aluminum?
Oh, yeah, it's in the.
I brought a piece of aluminum just so,
Oh, yeah.
because I figured you'd be asking me about that.
That would help tremendously.
Oh.
Okay?
Yeah,
Look,
there it
this
is.
is what it
That's
looks
the
like.
color.
Yeah, that doesn't look like yellow at all.
I'm sorry. That's actually the material.
I'm okay with this color.
That's definitely better.
I brought the right thing, didn't I?
Agreed.
And it's this side, not the white side.
Oh, right, yeah, that comes, whatever.
Okay.
We'll use the beige side, or ivory. It's definitely not yellow.
Are you averaging out the heights of all the other signs? It looks like your sign is just, it's so slightly, like maybe, I'm never very picky here, I'm just, as a,
The pizza sign's 3 feet. Let me see if I can see it. There's one that's small, one of them is small.
and
Yeah.
so that's-
The lettering,
Did you precondition
the
that?
lettering looks a little bigger.
So the pizza sign is 3 feet?
Yeah, it's not the size of the sign, it's the lettering that looks the point size essentially. It looks a little larger on here, but it is not technically, it's again, it's the way that it's looking in this Photoshop version. But once you measure it out, it is the same size as the other signs on the property. Or
That
the
to
rest
me
of the
was,
building.
that to me wasn't a deal breaker. It's just a color,
The color.
and we resolved that, and I think I'm okay.
Okay. David?
Yeah, my concern, I had essentially the same concerns, whether the perspective in the image is just making it look larger than it is, but it sounds like it is just the perspective of the photograph rather than the actual measurements. All the other signs, it looks like, are basically white with, black or red lettering or some red design elements. And I'm just wondering, and I do think that material that we looked at is a big improvement over what appears in the image here, but I'm just wondering, why not just really go with white to be completely consistent with the other signs that are already on the building?
If that's what's going to have to make it that way, I guess we could do it that way. It just, he thought the ivory was a nice color. Frankly, I went across, why is everything white? You know what I mean? So usually, ivory is usually something that works, but if that's what the board wants to see, we could do a white. We want to do a white with black and red.
My concern is, and I appreciated his statement in his application that he wanted to be consistent with the existing signage on the building.
Yep.
But then I see something that, that even if it's beige, it's going to appear more prominent than the other signs because of both the color and the size of the lettering. And I mean, maybe that was his intention, but that seems to go a little bit against what he wrote, that he really wanted to keep it consistent with the existing signage on the building.
Well, I think that statement is as much in terms of construction, the material used, the size, that sort of thing. You know, he's got there are some shorter storefronts, and this is one of the longer storefronts. He's got a double story, so. But if it's, if that's what you want them to have. You know, you'd like to have a sign, that's what you'll have to do. You know, it's up to you.
Feel sorry about that, Dave? I think, do we have that back again, that sample? It's pretty.
I think that the white will make it look pretty stark. It's a much larger sign
Well, yeah,
relative to the
that's
other
also a
ones.
concern.
I think that the beige will soften the look on that edge of the building a little bit, than if you make it all white.
Is the 3 foot by 15 foot, it's the same height, start with the 3 foot, it's the same height as shoe repair, the next one,
Yeah,
pizza.
that's the same height.
Same height, okay. So
It's just
you
the way
gotta
that looks.
start with that because perspective's gonna throw you off, it looks a little bigger.
Yeah.
And then the width, is it the same width as pizza or?
Yeah, it's the same width.
Okay, so it's
Yeah,
the same
yeah,
width
it's
as
just,
pizza.
for some reason, that perspective makes it
So
It's
seem
actually only
giant.
the middle one that has a different shape.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
like a
okay,
box.
that one, yeah,
It's more
yeah.
of a rec-
Yeah.
more
So,
box, but right
yes,
inside, yeah.
I think it's kind of okay.
I could live with it as either.
I think the white is not that great, they're gonna be all moving to the ivory after this.
That would be good.
I'm not sure.
For me.
I'm just asking, all right.
Yeah, I think it's
Usually,
I'm not, I don't feel strongly enough about it. I don't feel strongly enough about it to require a color change, so.
Do you feel like it needs a frame around it? Like you put a black border or
It
something?
just seems like there's more just blank space.
put a blackboard might,
I don't know.
That might help it kind
that
of.
would probably
Yeah.
break it in a little.
Break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
That,
It would make it look more like the other side.
That would help me, I think.
Okay.
I see your point on that, yeah.
it's a good problem.
Yeah, only the one in the middle doesn't have some sort of frame around it. The other 3 signs have like some sort of border. I don't know what that material is, but
Could just be
It's the same material,
It's
but
the
just
same aluminum?
just like a picture frame molding
Okay.
type of thing.
Or keep the whole thing to 3 feet.
Right.
Keep the size,
Including
including the front border.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. Gee.
I have nothing to add.
Open the floor, close the floor to public comments. Okay. Turn it back to the board.
I'll move to approve special permit docket number 3581 for the new signage at Arlington Laundry Village at 807 Mass Ave
With conditions.
with the conditions as stated.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next.
was anybody coming tonight?
So I had Elise Silver from
Okay.
She is able to, but the others, with the estimated time of 9:30,
Yeah.
had indicated that it was a little
That's
too
what we'll-
Yeah, I understand.
but that we would receive it from
Okay, so only one of these folks might be here.
Which one?
The first one.
Elise
Okay.
Cylinder.
Okay.
Oh, Elise.
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 The second. Okay, so we can have a discussion. I had a chance to review their resumes and the questions that were answered. I think they're all appropriate fits. I commend anyone who wants to take them on. This particular volunteer option, so I would have no problem with appointing the entire slate.
How many openings are there?
I'm sorry.
How many openings are there?
We need all of these members
We
to
do?
join. Yeah, we actually lost a couple members, and honestly, we're not turning anybody away. We don't have a set number for this committee, and I think because of what we're going to be moving forward with, talk about multifamily zoning, I think the more members, the better for this effort, and particularly people with this kind of background in expertise would be very helpful for the overall balance of the group.
You mean I didn't have to spend time trying to prioritize them in my mind?
No, but thank you for doing that.
Did you use a
You'd like me to
I
provide that feedback to the
yes,
applicant?
I use the scientific weighting system, which I will not reveal now, since I don't have.
Yeah, it's, they were all meant to be recommended for appointment. There's not, we don't have a choice. Unless
We
there's
have
some
one
reason.
We do have a
that you-
choice.
Unless there's some reason you would like to
I do have-
insert that.
I do have one question. This is, a couple of them are fairly new to the town. Why are they so interested in joining something so quickly?
So if I might, I've had conversations with all four of the prospective appointees. And I think, at least in the case of Elise and Elisa, similar names, their background is such that they'd like to be involved in the community that they now live in. Elisa, in particular, was involved in her former community of Winthrop, and I think Elise has a great background for the work that the Housing Plan Implementation Committee is working on. So I think that balances out the newness of their tenure in Arlington. But I think that overall, all four of the appointees have just great skills and great backgrounds that are going to add to the makeup of the committee, and hopefully even their professional expertise can assist in the staff's work as we advance a lot of the goals of the Housing Plan Implementation Committee. So,
Very good answer.
thank you.
David, Jean? Do you want to reveal your weighting?
I don't want to reveal my weighting. I'm happy to have them all on. There was one person who both was pretty new to the town and really had not much experience in this area at all. I got the impression that she was interested in the area and learning and had a lot of learning to do. So when I prioritized them, she didn't come to the top, but I think they're all perfectly appropriate to put on the committee. Because they're not all the same. I think that's good in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that even if there's not an expertise in housing per se, or housing production specifically, since that's what the goal of this committee is about, we need as many people with different backgrounds coming to this conversation. And there's already some people who are on the committee who, while they're Arlington residents and have lived here for a long time, don't necessarily have that expertise already. So I think we're getting a good balance at this point once all these folks are hopefully appointed.
So can we just move all forward and now do that?
Yeah.
So I so move that we appoint, where are the names? Appoint Elise Hupp, Bresnahan, Elisa Selinger, Cannon, Callagher, and Cyril Silverman to the Housing Plan Implementation Committee.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so we are well ahead of schedule, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We'll be back in 1 second.
I move to adjourn.
Or
May I just quickly ask a question? So I'm just making sure I know what you need in advance of Wednesday night, since we continued that hearing.
So I think
wanna
David
make sure I
and
capture that.
both intend to submit red line versions of the bylaw amendment. And if you could both do that as soon as possible, so Jenny can circulate that.
Tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
That's fine, yes.
I forgot, is this a PDF or a Word document you sent us?
Oh,
PDF.
Probably
Yeah.
PDF.
We'll
in
send
the
that.
notice.
Right.
That won't work for me.
yeah, we'll send the, unless you want to just scan your edits.
Only if I have software I don't have.
You need to go refresh it.
Yeah.
I would rather have an editable version so I can
Yeah.
more clearly indicate what I'm talking about.
So I'm having an operation tomorrow and we'll be under anesthesia and they told me not to make any important decisions tomorrow. So I won't be able to respond tomorrow to.
Well, I think Wednesday night, we can get into wordsmithing before a vote.
But what I can do is when I get home, I can just send you Jenny notes about what I think needs to
That's
be.
fine.
What about the section that you agreed said, we'll look at that, the location section?
I think we'll have, we
Well, I
have
made
to,
note of a couple
we
of
have
things
to
in
deal
my
with that
comments that you
separately.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah, the changes that they're talking about.
Yeah, I know, I just wanted to get those in advance of Wednesday.
We'll talk about that, we can talk about that amongst ourselves on Wednesday.
So can you send me a Word version tomorrow?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like them to. I might get to it on Wednesday. It's early.
Double checking if there's word in this agenda.
It's definitely, it's a PDF. Yeah, the only way to do it would be to separately, for them to separately cut and paste it. The only other issue was in section 5, distributing the uses, and I'm not sure that that's something that we would necessarily do. That's a proposed, a more significant amendment, is adding all the different uses into this table. So
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to
we're
discuss,
going to have
but
to
I'm
discuss that more.
comfortable with accepting clerical changes.
Okay.
If I might, it might be simple to add something to the definition so that it's clear that it falls into this category. That might be the reverse engineered way of that.
We'll figure out how to answer that question. So we know, I think, what to do for Wednesday. The only other thing I want to note is that you also have a meeting on the 19th, not to forget that, at that meeting. So I posted the agenda for the 7th already with all the materials. At that meeting, we actually have another hearing. The hearing that was supposed to happen on October 15th is happening on Wednesday night. And so that's 925 Mass Ave, that's your hearing. And then you have this
So that's at
marijuana.
7:30.
Yeah, and then
Are we here?
we're back here again,
Yeah.
yes. And then the only other thing I added, well, actually, there's 2 other things. A sign bylaw update, because we had a public forum, so I want to give you that. And then we're going to talk about the 2019 meeting schedule. So if you can take a look at the dates that I'm proposing, some of them were changed because of holidays. Do that in advance of Wednesday night, I appreciate it, to see how it jives with your schedules respectively. And then the 19th is when we have to vote on our report to town meeting. That's why that meeting is also important.
Did you send out a list of all the dates?
It's actually posted in Nova's agenda, so it wasn't posted the other day, it was posted today with everything. Everything was officially posted today to the 7th.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to renew your motion?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.